Welcome back, everybody. We're continuing our conversation on culture and civilization and returning to the idea of details. In my previous presentation, I talked about culture and civilization and details by comparing it to making a stew. You have to have your basic ingredients, the meat, the vegetables, the stock, all of that good stuff to form the basic elements of stew. And so while those are necessary and they can be, filling, they don't quite make for a palatable or interesting, memorable, flavorful experience. And that's why you have to add spices, salt and pepper, and chili powder, and all of that other good stuff. And so those little details, while not always necessary for understanding how a civilization runs and why it works and everything else, they may not be that important to that, but they will give your setting life and character and make it very interesting and create that important sense of immersion that is so important in capturing your reader's attention. So, in that vein, we're going to talk about just some little details about modern day Japan that are, you don't need to know them to understand Japan necessarily, but they make it such a much more interesting place. So let's talk about the term head honcho. This actually comes from Japan. When Japanese elementary school children walk in a group, it's called a han, H-A-N. One child is the leader, or honcho, H-A-N-C-H-O, and this person is in charge of making sure that no one gets lost or bullied. And so this is where we actually get the term honcho from. So um, we get the term head honcho from this. Many Westerners, when they see these Hans walking down the street, they say it looks like a bunch of ducklings walking in a row, which sounds absolutely adorable. Let's talk about calendar days a little bit. Every culture has certain events that are commemorated on certain days. In the United States, we have the 4th of July. Um, Christmas is December 25th for many people. New Year's is on January 1st. And so Japan is no different. And so here are just some interesting little days that fall on the calendar in Japan. For example, February 9th is Meat Day because 2-9 can be pronounced Niku, which is also the name for meat. So this is the busiest day of the year for Korean barbecue restaurants. May 23rd is Kisu no Hi, or Kiss Day, because the first movie to show a kissing scene in Japan was shown on May 23rd, 1946. Probably my favorite day is February 22nd, or Neko no Hi, or Cat Day, because 222 can be pronounced in Japanese as nyan nyan nyan, which is how the Japanese pronounce meow. So in Japan, if a kitty is making a noise, it's not meow, it's meow. So I'm not doing it very well, but hopefully that gives you an idea. So let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about superstitions. Every country has its own superstitions, and it's not even limited to countries. You go to certain areas of the United States, and they have completely different superstitions than the ones that you've grown up with. And so here are just a few. It is bad luck to urinate on a worm because he may get revenge by making your private parts swell. Don't whistle at night or a snake will come. And if you see a hearse, you should hide your thumbs or else your parents will die. This is because the thumb, or oyayubi, translates to parent finger. So, there's the symbolism here. You're hiding your parents from this symbol of death. And Lord knows there are plenty of other superstitions in Japan. And not to make it sound like a superstitious country, it's no more or less superstitious than any other. But there are a lot of interesting ones, and if you know anything about Japan and you know some of these, share them with me because I always like hearing more about them. But we're going to move on now, and just some miscellaneous facts about Japan. One interesting idea in Japan is that you can actually tell a lot about a person by his or her blood type. If you have type A blood, you are neat and you're tidy, you're a planner. If you have type B, you're more laid back. The phrase that they use in Japan is that they go at their own pace. And if you are type O, then you've got it going on, because type O's are thinkers. They're the ones who are the most passionate, the most dedicated, the most innovative, and they make the best leaders. Another interesting phenomenon, and very, very tied in with modern day Japan, are individuals who are labeled as neat or hikikomori. These are two different terms. Neat is a acronym for not educated, employed, or trained. And this is a large problem. If you know anything about Japan, you know that their society is fairly well regulated. And so people have certain paths that they have to go on. And they decide at a fairly young age, going through school and high school especially is very intense, and it prepares you. You know, when you leave high school, you either have a job or you have an enrollment in some college. Well, as you might imagine, this puts a lot of pressure on individuals, on kids. And there's some who have recently, in the past 20 years or so, started bucking the system. And they're called NEETs. And they are kind of a source of shame for many older Japanese, because they're going against tradition. You know, the Japanese, and you have to be really careful when you make blanket statements like I'm doing here, but traditionally they've been a very work-oriented society, especially after World War II when they were rebuilding. And so you would have men who would work 14-hour days, and even when they were done working, they weren't done. Part of work was part of your duties at work was to go out drinking with the other guys afterwards, whether you wanted to or not. And so this doesn't leave a lot of time for family or for rest. You know, there are plenty of stories of Japanese businessmen who died sitting at their workstation. And so, again, this is a very stressful way of living, and a lot of young Japanese men and women are going against the system. They're just not wanting to be a part of it. But because they're not a part of it, because they're not making money, they're listless and aimless, and they just don't have a sense of identity, and they're not contributing to the culture. So it's a very sticky situation. They're a further step away from that, like the next level, are the hikikomori, who are basically shut-ins. They exhibit a lot of the same symptoms as agoraphobia. They do not leave their apartments. They work completely on the computer. They get everything delivered to them, and they never leave. And so, as you might imagine, the NEETs and the hikikomori are both indicated, as you might imagine from the character traits that I'm describing, they're not dating a lot. There's not a lot of Japanese who are getting married and having kids. Many Japanese, modern Japanese, have sworn off sex. They're not interested, and so right now Japan is facing a crisis because it has a rapidly aging population with no influx of young blood to come in to make it to replace them. So something needs to be done, and it's very interesting and kind of sad right now in a very large sense. Another interesting fact that you see played out a lot in Japanese culture and in anime especially is that Japan is obsessed with Great Britain. Some I don't say as a historian, but it might just be somebody on the internet, once said that Japan's entry into World War II was really to get Britain Senpai to pay attention to them. And these you can see this influence in a lot of different aspects of Japanese society. One particular example that I think is very interesting is trains in Japan are described as either nobori, which means climbing, or kudari, descending, related to whether or not they're moving towards Tokyo. So you're climbing towards Tokyo or you're descending from there. This is similar to how the British described trains 150 years ago. Now, that's just one example, but if you look, there are quite a few others out there, and so it's very interesting. Japan is an island. It is its own nation, but it is an island, and it kind of has an island mentality, and so it's insular in some respects. There is a certain sense of superiority, um, and there's a distrust of outsiders that goes along with that. And so their fascination with Great Britain is kind of interesting. It kind of goes against the grain of this island mentality that they have. Although it's interesting because also Great Britain has a real island mentality as well, but this is about Japan and not Great Britain. So the final little detail that I wanted to mention are mascots, or they're also called Eurochara. Um, I'm probably not pronouncing these two terribly well, but you get the idea. Japan is broken into 47 prefectures, and one of the big sources of income for these prefectures and for a lot of Japan is tourism. And to drum up tourism, each of these 47 prefectures have created a unique mascot. Now, unfortunately, I was not able to find a picture of one of these mascots, or a picture of what I know to be one of these mascots, that I could use because of Creative Commons issues, and so I'm not entirely sure if this rabbit with onion ears is one of the mascots or not, but this is exactly what they would do. They have people who dress up as these particular mascots, and the mascot is branded all over the place. In one particular prefecture, Gunma, they have a horse. He's called Gunma-chan, and so if you look up Gunma-chan or Gunma mascot, you'll find pictures of him, and there's some neat ones, including one where he's dressed like one of the members of Gatchaman, which, as an old school anime fan, I totally geek out about that. But yeah, if you go to these prefectures, you can find these mascots, and they're absolutely adorable. And it kind of goes into what is called kawaii, which translates more or less to cute. And the Japanese love cute. They love kawaii, and to the point where you will see anime characters. You'll see what are usually called chibi characters, or small, more cartoony characters based on other established anime characters. Like you could see a chibi Asuka from Neon Genesis Evangelion, and it could be on your coffee can or on a box of cereal or something like that, because market research has shown that if you add this element of kawaii to your product, to your product merchandising, the Japanese will buy it in droves. So it's really interesting. One more example would be the Japanese cell phone carrier SoftBank. They have a mascot called Otosan, which is the name for father. And Otosan is a beautiful white dog, and he talks, and he has a Japanese wife, an African American son, a Japanese daughter, and in some commercials, Tommy Lee Jones plays their maid, who is also an alien. And if you watch, and you can find these on YouTube, if you look up Otosan commercials, you can find them there. And when they have subtitles, he's referred to as Alien Jones, which I don't it amuses me to no end. So, like with the previous presentation, it's just scratching the surface, but the purpose of this is just to kind of get you talking and to get you thinking about the little details. When you're writing your own work, you can't just have detail. You can't just throw everything against the wall like that. You have to be strategic. But once you kind of get a hang of it, and once you find ways to add in these details in ways that are organic and interesting and add something to the story, then your world is going to be much more immersive and much more interesting, and it's going to be just better in general for you and for the reader. So if you have any questions or comments, if you want to share any interesting tidbits about your own hometown, let me know. Send me a message, and I'm more than happy to read them.